Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this poor air quality day. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm kind of craving s'mores from the smell in the air. So it is now 9:30, and I'd like to go ahead and call the July 16th meeting of the STP Project Selection Committee to order. Just a reminder, if you haven't already, please be sure to complete the sign-in sheet out in the hallway before you leave today. Members of the audience that wish to make public comments later on the agenda should fill out a public comment card and hand that to any of the CMAP staff in the room. This meeting is being broadcast on Zoom and is being recorded. In order for those online to hear what's being said in the room, it's critical, of course, that we use our microphones as well as identifying ourselves when making a motion or a second. For those participating via Zoom, please keep your microphones muted unless you're called upon to speak. When appropriate in the agenda, I will request comments from those online, and you can indicate your desire to speak via the chat box. With that, let's start today with self-introductions of the members here at the table. I'm Kiama Dobbs, Chair of the Committee representing CMAP. Mayor Shelkey.
Jeff Shelkey, Mayor Batavia. Jeff Shelkey, Mayor Batavia, Chairman of the CMAP Council of Mayors.
Grant Davis with CDOT.
Ann Zhang with CDOT.
Chad Riddle, IDOT Local Roads, District 1.
Mark Kukler, Village President of LaGrange and Member Council of Mayors.
John Paul Deepla, FHWA.
Heather Mullins, Regional Transportation Authority.
Scott Hennings filling in for Tara Orban, representing the counties.
All right, fantastic. We have a quorum of voting members. So first up on our agenda today is agenda changes and announcements. Staff has not proposed any changes or announcements, but do any members of the committee wish to propose any changes or make any announcements? All right, seeing none, our next item is approval of the minutes from May 14th, 2026. We do have before us that draft of those minutes. Are there any corrections or additions to those?
Make a motion for the approval.
Fantastic. Motion by Mayor Shelkey. Do I have a
Second.
second from Mayor Kukler? Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Thank you. Moving on then to the meat of our agenda is our active program management reports. We have John Hodsma to provide highlights today, starting with a shared fund status update, followed by an update on the regional STP accounting. Go ahead, John.
Good morning, all. So since I was last here in May, obligations for the shared fund have stayed at 7.9 million, so no other projects have obligated. The next slated project to obligate its funding is the LaSalle Street Bridge project, which is now looking like it will happen in September of this year. The project has also seen a significant increase, moving from 55 million for construction to 121 million. The project did request additional funding in 26. However, since the project would use the rest of the shared fund mark and start using redistribution, it's limited to 20% of the original shared fund programmed amount of 44 million is an increase in 26, which equates out to 8.8 million, and staff did approve that request for 2026. Since this project isn't bound to the 20% increase rule outside of 26, CDOT also requested to have the 18th Street Viaduct project and the Ogden Avenue project, both those programmed for 20 million, one in 27 and one in 28, moved out of those years into the contingency list. And that gives room for the LaSalle Street Bridge project to request an additional 20 million in 2027 and 20 million in 2028, which staff approved. These will be post-obligation authorizations, meaning that they wouldn't get authorized until the initial 52.8 million gets fully expended. Of the other projects programmed using planned use of redistribution, it's anticipated that the Sullivan Road project will be on the November state letting. You'll also notice that the 131st Street project has an updated target letting of January 2027, which is beyond federal fiscal year 2026, and usually that would trigger reprogramming out of planned use of redistribution. But since it is eligible for a 6-month extension, it is being left in planned use or redistribution for the time being. And it's contingent on if the LaSalle Street Bridge project happens or not. If LaSalle does end up using funds in 2026, there won't be any more mark to carry over. Therefore, that 131st project would need to be reprogrammed. However, if LaSalle doesn't end up going, there'll be available mark to carry over into 2027. The last item to note on planned use redistribution projects is the Randall Road at Big Timber Road project. That was moved out of planned use or redistribution to the contingency list since its letting date moved from September of this year to June of 2027. It is expected that this will be able to move back into the program in 2027 once it's overcome right-of-way delays. Other updates to note outside of 26, the Burnham Avenue grade separation project received a cost increase of $162,967 in federal fiscal year 2027 for engineering one that staff approved. And other than the Burnham Avenue grade separation and the LaSalle Street Bridge project cost increases that I've noted, no other changes have been made to federal fiscal years 2027 through 2030. So that includes the shared fund update. Happy to take questions if there are any.
Any questions for John on these programming changes? All right, seeing none, John, you want to continue?
Yeah, sure. Moving on to the regional accounting, there's been more progress on regional obligations since May. The region's moved from about 82.7 million to 91.5 million. No additional councils outside of the ones I have been reporting on the past few project selection committees, those being Central Council, Northwest Council, Kane-Kendall Council, and McHenry Council have, those are the ones that have begun drawing from redistribution, and those 4 councils have used a combined 26.9 million of redistribution. There is still $100.6 million programmed using planned use of redistribution currently. And as always, staff's going to continue monitoring those projects that are programmed for planned use of redistribution, especially from the ones that are targeting the November letting, as the final PS&E deadline for that November letting is going to be, I believe it's next week, July 27th. And then as we move closer to the end of the federal fiscal year, obligation deadline extensions for STP selecting bodies are due July 31st. So we should have totals for how much each council has been approved to carry over into federal fiscal year 2027 at the August PSC meeting. That's it for the regional accounting, unless there are any questions.
Any questions for John? All right. Thank you, John, for keeping track of all of these moving parts. All right. Next on our agenda, we're going to continue with our methodology update discussions for our next call cycle, starting with Kate and Aspen to talk to us more about the resilience factor, followed by Allison with a proposal to modify our complete streets planning factor to broaden the scope to universal mobility. And then Doug will wrap us up with discussion about maintaining current inclusive growth and jobs plus households criteria. So welcome back, Kate, and welcome, Aspen.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Kate Avasic. I lead CMAP's Climate Resilience Program, and I'm joined today with my colleague, Aspen Walters, who's a policy analyst in our policy division. And so I'm happy to be back here today to provide some more details into the proposed changes to the resilience planning factor. Through today's presentation, what we want to do is revisit what was discussed at the last meeting in May. We want to share some more details on the proposed scoring methodology, and then we're going to walk through a few project examples from the last funding cycle or submission cycle to see how the scoring would change. And this is really based on the information that we were provided in the last cycle. Okay, so just as a reminder, what is the resilience planning factor? So during the last update cycle, the resilience planning factor was added to replace and really enhance the green infrastructure factor with the goal of accounting for the benefits of climate resilience in funding decisions. By understanding both the need and the impact of proposed improvements, we're able to then encourage and prioritize projects that proactively address flood or heat impacts that are not just felt today. Certainly, these projects are meeting the mark for today, but also thinking about how they can consider the increased temperature and precipitation that could impact the asset over its entire lifespan. So also incorporating resilience into the program scoring criteria is a recommended strategy in the Regional Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan, or TRIP. So now that TRIP is complete, we want to make some modest updates to this factor. In May, you'll recall that we recommended 2 changes. First, we proposed using TRIP's more expansive suite of 21 project strategies as an approved list of resilience elements for the shared fund. This recognizes the importance of both nature-based or green infrastructure solutions, as well as structural or gray infrastructure solutions to help build overall system resilience. So instead of requiring gray infrastructure elements to be designed above today's design standard, this change would make more elements eligible outright, and then use the scoring process to really assess the impact of the proposed project. So that was the first recommendation. Secondly, we proposed leaning on TRIP's scoring methodology that was used to evaluate transportation resilience projects that are on TRIP's priority project list. So this change will help us better evaluate shared fund submissions based on project need and impact. And we believe this change will help ensure consistency between this effort and TRIP, and also lessen the effort required by sponsors when submitting projects that are on the TRIP priority list, since we already have the information we need. We did receive some feedback from committee members during the last meeting, so I wanted to take a little bit of time to revisit what we heard and then share how we've responded. One of the current concerns that we heard was about the cost associated with incorporating resilience into project design, and whether the resilience factor could put urban projects at an unfair advantage. For example, providing additional capacity for stormwater runoff can cost much more in a space-constrained urban setting than a suburban or rural one. We also heard uncertainty around what's meant by a project going above and beyond the design standard, as the new rainfall standard in our state, known as Bulletin 75, really makes the infrastructure that we construct today much more resilient to heavy rains than much of the assets that we have in the system. Additionally, we heard how the cost of complying to this new standard, the costs are real, and they're leading to more expensive projects overall. So while we still very much want this planning factor to encourage more resilient transportation projects, and we believe that it can provide a little bit of a boost for those projects that do have much higher costs as a result of incorporating resilience elements, we have made some changes in response that I want to walk through. So first, we're proposing to add a little bit more weight to the project needs score, allocating 60% for need and 40% for impact. In May, I proposed a 50-50 split, which is what we did for TRIP. So we believe that this helps acknowledge where we're at today. We have a lot of assets that have high and very high needs and high vulnerability to flooding in particular. And so many of the projects that are being proposed through the shared fund, or at least a substantial portion of them, they are trying to proactively address issues facing to those assets today. But at the same time, we still want to encourage really impactful solutions. So we think that a 60-40 split can help maintain the balance while tipping the scales ever so slightly towards need. Second, the impact score acknowledges the benefits of designing to our new current standards, so that being Bulletin 75 rainfall. So just with the TRIP project list, projects that incorporate resilience elements and bring the project up to today's standards will receive points for doing so. Lastly, we refined the list of impact scoring criteria and the definitions of those criteria for clarity, and we'll continue to do so when we go to revise the scoring booklet. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Aspen Walters, who's going to walk us through the proposed scoring methodology. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Again, my name's Aspen Walters. So I'm going to walk through the proposed changes to the STP shared fund evaluation methodology. And the key change is related to how impactful the project is in mitigating the risks of climate hazards like flooding and extreme heat. So currently, projects scored for resilience can earn up to 5 points, 1 point for having a resilience policy in the jurisdiction, and up to 4 points for resilience elements. For the resilience elements, a project was first screened to assess the exposure of the asset to flooding, and the last scoring round, TRIP scores, were already integrated for this part of the evaluation. And project scores with higher exposure received more points for inclusion of resilience elements that address the vulnerability than those located in where the TRIP vulnerability scores are lowest, or that include resilience elements that are not directly related to the vulnerabilities. It was then assessed that the type of infrastructure elements incorporated to improve the ability of existing surface transportation asset to withstand one or more elements of climate hazards. Only green infrastructure and gray infrastructure that exceeded the design standard were considered. Our first recommendation change is to eliminate the resilience policy point and instead focus all 5 of the points on the project need and impact of the proposed resilience elements. Second, we recommend using TRIP's more expansive suite of 21 strategies as an improved list of resilience elements, while still allowing other elements to be considered on a case-by-case basis. This list, which is included in your packet, includes both green and gray infrastructure elements. So this change comes from TRIP's messaging that both green and gray infrastructure will be needed to make our transportation system more resilient to climate change. With this expanded list of eligible resilience elements, each project will first be evaluated on whether it incorporates any of those elements. So if not, the project will automatically receive 0 points for the resilience planning factor. And if it does incorporate at least one resilience element, it will enter our scoring process, our proposed scoring process. So this image outlines TRIP's methodology for scoring projects and what elements will be used for the STP scoring. System need will still be determined based only on the exposure of the project, so like it was in the past. And then impact will be assessed based on the project's ability to mitigate the need and or build additional resilience elements and co-benefits. We'll do this by assessing 4 of TRIP's 8 impact criteria, and those are highlighted in green. And while the TRIP methodology weighs need and impact equally, like Kate said, for the shared fund methodology, we'll increase the weight of the need score to 60% and 40% for impact. Weighing the need slightly more than the impact acknowledges the reality that we're facing. We have serious flooding and stormwater needs, and upgrading flood-prone infrastructure, even to just today's standard, can be a major benefit. We believe aligning this methodology more closely with TRIP will help ensure consistency between this effort and ours for TRIP, and then lessen the effort required by sponsors when submitting projects that are on the TRIP priority list. All right, for the need score, to determine exposure levels for the need score, we'll use TRIP's vulnerability assessment data. And for larger projects that span multiple asset segments, the highest risk score along the project boundaries will be used as the level of exposure. TRIP exposure scores fall into 6 categories, spanning from 3 as the highest exposure to not exposed. And this easily translates to our 5-point scale for the shared fund. The other 40% of the score will consider impact. So there'll be 4 criteria. First, risk mitigation. So to what extent does the project protect transportation assets from extreme weather events and climate hazards? Then we have, does the project modernize assets to reflect or go beyond standard design requirements for resilience and future climate adaptation? For example, providing additional storage through gray or green infrastructure for future rainfall. Third, how well does the project integrate green or gray infrastructure solutions for long-term resilience? And then fourth, does the project provide additional co-benefits beyond resilience, such as improvements in air quality, water quality, or biodiversity? Each category will be scored on a scale of 1 to 5, then averaged together for that final impact score. So now I'll step through a few project examples to show how this proposed methodology works in practice. And I want to note that the proposed scores are based on information from the last cycle, not the information that we would solicit in these upcoming projects. So more information from project sponsors will increase scoring accuracy in the future. All right, so this Humboldt Park streetscape project in the city of Chicago is seeking to mitigate urban flooding issues through green infrastructure improvements. It previously scored a total of 5 points. It got 4 points for the resilience elements and one for a policy point. Using the proposed methodology, this project gets 4 points for need because the highest exposure along the streetscape area is 2.5. And then next, looking at impact, the project will implement permeable pavers where possible and vegetated infiltration swales to reduce the amount of stormwater sent into the system. And then native plantings and street trees will also be included to reduce the urban heat island effect. For risk mitigation, the permeable pavers and the vegetated infiltration swales will significantly reduce vulnerability and enhance climate adaptation. So it receives a 4 out of 5 for risk mitigation. In the third column, the gray and green infrastructure factor looks at the effectiveness of gray and green strategies. So this project effectively uses 2 green infrastructure strategies, so it receives a 4 out of 5 points. In the fourth column, the modernization factor assesses how the project modernizes assets to reflect or go beyond standard design requirements for resilience and future climate adaptation. Based on the information provided, the project meets design standard and will receive a 3. Lastly, in the fifth column, the broader environmental benefits factor awards points to projects that provide air, water, and biodiversity co-benefits. The inclusion of vegetated infiltration swales, native plantings, and street trees will enhance water quality and biodiversity, so the project will receive a 5 for this factor. And then when we calculate, we take the average of all 4 of those impact categories in green. We get an average score of 4 for impact. And then to get the final score, we take 60% of the need score of 4, and that is 2.4. And then that's added to 40% of the impact score of 4, which is 1.6% or 1.6. And then you add those together to get a final score of 4. And you'll notice this is slightly lower than the current methodology, but it receives the high resilience elements points, but we no longer include the policy point. Our second example is 143rd Street from Will Cook Road to Wolf Road in Cook County. To reduce the impact of flooding, this project includes elevating the road, adding a geogrid reinforced embankment support system at the Long Run Creek floodplain, and in-pipe storage, sewer storage, detention, and compensatory storage. It previously scored a total of 0 points because there was no relevant resilience policy and the project only included gray infrastructure that did not exceed the design standard. For our new methodology, for need, this project gets 5 points because the project location includes the highest exposure score of 3 along the project boundaries. For risk mitigation, the action of elevating the road will significantly reduce vulnerability and enhance climate adaptation, so therefore the project receives a 4. When evaluating the effectiveness of green and gray infrastructure, the 3 different structural strategies that this project proposes warrants 4. Then modernization, the project meets the design standards and will receive a 3. And lastly, for the broader environmental benefits factor, no additional co-benefits related to air, water, and biodiversity are present, so it will receive a 1 for that factor. When these 4 scores for impact are averaged together, you get a score of 3. And then when we add that 60% weight and the 40% weight to impact, the final score is 4.2. So this new methodology really acknowledges the important role that great infrastructure can play in increasing resilience, shown by this project now scoring a 4.2 when it previously scored a 0. The last example is Renwick Road reconstruction in Will County. This project has a 2.5 exposure score, resulting in 4 points for need. The project involves stormwater drainage improvements to manage additional pavement, as well as off-site improvements to resolve drainage issues that go beyond what is required for the design standards. And this project significantly reduces vulnerability and enhances climate adaptation, so it's going to receive a 4 in risk mitigation. This project also includes at least one major green or gray infrastructure element, so it will receive a 4 for the green-gray infrastructure factor. And then for modernization, the project implements improvements that do go beyond current minimum requirements, so that warrants a score for 4 for this project. And then lastly, due to a lack of information about co-benefits, a score of 1 was given for broader environmental benefits. The score could be increased if the applicant detailed the type of design of the offsite improvements they mentioned in the description. So the average of these scores is a 3.25 for impact. And when combined with the need score of 4, the final score is 3.7. And this is also an increase from the current methodology, which gave this project a 3. So I went over a lot. Thank you all for your time today. But we'd love to hear immediate reactions, feedback, questions. We have some time for that.
So first of all, thank you, Kate and Aspen, for preparing the examples. I think that, I know it helps me wrap my head around what's being proposed. So thank you for that. Are there questions or comments, thoughts on this proposal? It was a lot to take in, but I think it was responsive to what we heard at our last meeting as well. So thoughts? No thoughts mean we like it.
I agree it was responsive to, I think, a lot of the concerns that were raised last time. So thank you.
Going once, going twice. All right, good work. We look forward to seeing the write-up at our next meeting of how it looks in the application booklet. All right, next up we have Allison Dressman with a proposal to replace our current complete streets planning factor with a universal mobility factor. So welcome, Allison.
Here we go. So good morning. I'm Allison Dressman, and I'm a planner here at CMAP in our Regional Policy and Implementation Division. And I'm back again this month to introduce a proposed planning factor to include in this year's STP Shared Fund Methodology Update. This planning factor emphasizes universal mobility, building upon the accessibility work being carried out by partners across the region supported by CMAP. So in 2021, the Metropolitan Planning Council, or MPC, released a report called Where the Sidewalk Ends, which examined how well Northeastern Illinois municipalities were complying with ADA Title II. The findings were significant. Only 22 communities, which is about 9% of our region, had an ADA transition plan in place. So this identified a clear regional gap in ADA compliance and laid the foundation for CMAP's Accessible Communities program. CMAP launched the program in 2022 with support from IDOT. The Accessible Communities program was designed to enhance accessibility in the public right-of-way and foster a more inclusive region. It provides a range of supports from training, resources, regional engagement, and direct technical assistance to municipalities. As a result, as of last month, the number of communities with a public right-of-way ADA transition plan increased from 22 to 56. While this represents a substantial progress in improving this compliance, it also highlights the need for ongoing awareness and implementation assistance to achieve long-term accessibility improvements across our region. So before we get more into the opportunity that this presents, I want to ground us in the way we currently evaluate projects for the STP Shared Fund program and more specifically, how we use planning factors to award points for project impacts that align with our regional priorities. So you just heard from Kate and Aspen about the resilience factor, so I will keep this part quick. But planning factors are the points that are awarded to candidate projects for elements advancing the work of the ON2 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, including the ones you see here: inclusive growth, complete streets. There's a formatting issue with that. That was supposed to highlight the whole thing. Resilience, freight, and transit supportive density. A project in each category along the left-hand side cannot receive more than 30 points across all of those factors. And the project's category determines how those factor points are distributed across each of the columns there. So today we're going to talk about the complete streets planning factor, which is that third column that you see in the table that would be outlined. So most of the project types can earn up to 10 points for this factor. However, bus speed improvements, road expansion, road reconstruction are capped at just 5 points. And transit station, yard, and terminal improvements cannot receive points for this planning factor. So I'll pause here for a moment just so you can see how these points are distributed. Next slide, please. Okay, so under the current methodology, complete streets planning factor points are awarded based on whether the jurisdiction has an adopted complete streets policy and whether the project adds, replaces, improves, or retains complete streets elements. Those points are then scaled to the maximum complete streets points for each project category that we just saw on the previous slide. And a limitation that we've seen with this approach is that it really hasn't created much differentiation among projects as of late, warranting this planning factor less useful than originally intended. That's likely due, at least in part, to the growing number of jurisdictions in our region that have that complete streets policy in place, which is a good problem to have, but definitely presents an opportunity for us. So we can see how the current complete streets planning factor awards points for both the policy and design elements according to this chart, and how the total available complete streets points depends on the project type, as I mentioned before. For example, a roadway reconstruction project can earn up to 5 complete streets points, while a safety project can be awarded up to 10 points. The diminishing effectiveness, next slide, please. The diminishing effectiveness of the complete streets planning factor and the momentum that has been building behind our Accessible Communities program creates an opportunity to introduce a more impactful measure that advances universal mobility in projects funded through the STP Shared Fund. The proposed Universal Mobility, or planning factor that I'm talking about today promotes projects that enhance accessible mobility for all users, advancing the goals of CMAP's Accessible Communities program, while encouraging implementation of those traditional complete streets elements that currently earn projects points. Under the proposed planning factor, points are awarded for project elements that improve accessibility, normalized by their project cost, and scaled to the current max complete streets planning factor points allowed for each project type, which again was that table that we showed in the beginning. To keep the scoring system both effective and fair, points are assigned based on how much of an element is included, whether that's a measurable quantity, the linear mileage of the improvement, or a simple yes/no for whether a feature is present. So Doug is handing out this chart so you can see it more closely. Thank you, because I know that's small. So for example, on this, for this planning factor, a project can earn points for the number of accessible transit boarding pads that it connects to the sidewalk network. So that would be the quantity. But it can also earn points for sidewalk mileage. And there would be different point values depending on whether the sidewalks are built on one side of the roadway or on both, because we know that there's a different impact there. Some elements are also simply scored as a binary yes/no, such as whether the project includes speed reduction measures. For now, the points listed here, as you can see, are in draft form, but help to illustrate how certain design elements carry a higher point value based on their potential effect on accessibility. You may notice that some elements can earn points in both the recently proposed safety criterion and as well as this new planning factor. So that's intentional. We are trying to move toward recognizing the multiple benefits that certain design elements provide. This is a short-term improvement, but it also moves us toward future refinement, one that could incorporate what we call multipliers, or combinations of measures that create a compounding effect on outcomes. And also I want to note that an occurrence like that with the safety and accessible mobile or accessibility would only happen for a project in the safety category, which I think last round was about 5 projects. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a summary of what I just proposed. The new universal mobility planning factor would replace the complete streets planning factor that we have in place currently. The points would be based on project scope elements that enhance accessibility in the project location, removing that policy element. And the planning factor point structure, the max 30 points and how they're broken out by the project type would not change. So I can take any questions or comments now.
Questions or comments for Allison? Go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, I would, I applaud what you're doing here. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Out in the western suburbs, we've got a new transportation problem that's kind of emerging on us, and that's called the electric bicycle. And it is, we've already had one person killed. I'm afraid we're gonna have more because the riders of them just think they can go any place. And they're riding around town. The police had a 10-year-old kid at 11:30 2 nights ago riding his bicycle around downtown. I mean, it's stuff like that, and there's no license plates on these things. And, we've come up with our own ticket now to give to people who radically ride these things. But in Batavia, we've got the Fox River divides the town in half, and we've built a river walk on the banks of the Fox River. And that's been a great place for, bicycles and specifically walkers. I've got a huge senior living community in town, and they're out there using it all the time. But now it's become quote unquote the freeway for the electric bike boys. And so they're running up and down the riverbank on these bicycles. So I don't know, does this jump into electric bikes at any point in time?
No, this is just about the infrastructure. So it would just be it would be the same as before where complete streets elements such as, separated multi-use paths like that would earn points for a project. And yeah.
I don't think I'm the only mayor in the suburbs
Right.
that has this problem. I think it's getting to be quite widespread. And I guess I would suggest that maybe the staff should take some look at this thing. I mean, for some reason, the state legislature, I don't know, we need to put license plates on these things and have lights for night riding or whatever the issue may be. But it's a really fast growth, and they're not cheap to buy. And the police chief's telling me the other day, the newer problem is that we have people from outside Batavia, or maybe they are from Batavia. They eye people, specifically smaller kids that have these nice bikes. And when the kid drops it off someplace to go into the store, they come along with a truck and pick it up and go buy bike because they can resell these someplace else in the area. So, I mean, it's becoming quite an issue in the suburban area.
Yeah, certainly an issue that a lot of folks are dealing with across the country, really. So thanks for sharing that. There's nothing specific to this planning factor as it's proposed right now for
No, but I bring it up
enforcement
because
or
I think
policy.
it's a factor that
Mhm.
should be somehow included in future, studies or ideas or whatever you're doing here,
Yeah.
because it's a growing thing. And 10 years ago, I didn't have this, but boy, I sure got it now.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll jump in. It is a problem, obviously, in LaGrange. Also, I thought that heard that the Secretary of State is thinking about requiring or trying to get the legislature to require license plates on the e-bikes so that some of our cameras and things could start recording more of the violations and we can find out, who's doing the unsafe driving and things like that. I wanted to move to another thing, which is the first 2 lines, the complete bike pedestrian gap, key destination. Why the difference between urban and non-urban districts?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We wanted to distinguish between those two because this is a quantity measure. And if you're in an urban district, you're probably going to rack up more points because of just the nature of things being closer together, more destinations, just how the development patterns are. And so we just didn't want to we didn't want urban areas to be able to rack up those points, equally. So Exactly, yeah.
So the more dense you are, you get punished?
You don't get punished. You still get points for connecting destinations. It's just making sure that there's not an exponential difference between the number of points that you would earn, and that rural areas have more of an equal shot at connecting locations and getting rewarded for it.
Okay.
Could you walk us through, what's the basis of how you determine like the proposed points, draft points?
Mhm.
Where do those values come from?
Yeah, so they currently are, we looked at how the points were before with the complete streets planning factor. We looked at the effect of on accessibility. So a lot of that is, you know, does it make it connected? Does it make it safe for someone? Is it making it more desirable to use that that path or that infrastructure? And so they were based on that, you know, the impact, if it's a lower impact, it might be a 0.1, and if it's a higher impact, it would be a 0.5. And then the measure was to really get at making sure that the true scale of it is realized. So if you're, you know, making, if you're building 2 miles of something of a bike path versus, you know, a couple 100 feet, there's a difference there.
Okay. And so the points were basically determined based on your guys' judgment, or was there a specific study or some publication that it came from, or
Yeah, so
thereof?
yeah, no, that's a good question. We are looking at the FHWA design tiers as well to look at, you know, separation versus awareness. So signage versus a separate facility and the impact there.
And kind of follow up with that, could you just explain the measurement and how you would determine points? So I don't know, let's just say we're doing a road that's half a mile long and installing sidewalks on both sides. Like, are you proposing then, since it's a half a mile, you would get, you know, X points, but if it was a mile long segment, you would get 2X points?
Right. And then we added in the normalization by the project cost to make sure that a project that was, you know, 3 miles in length and had the ability to install that much of the facility versus a shorter project that didn't have that ability. So trying to kind of normalize in that way.
Okay. I got.
Yeah, so kind of piggybacking on that, so a longer segment would be normalized down because of the cost. So that the half mile segment is seen as just as impactful as the mile long segment.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
By
if
normalizing,
you would assume like the cost is twice to do twice the
Right.
length, the points would be the same if they are equal.
If they're normalized, yeah, yeah,
Right. Right. Thanks.
yeah. Wrapping our heads around the math.
Yeah, thank you.
Then I got one last comment.
Yeah.
So most of these I'm seeing like installs. So it's if something is existing, you're getting points for that if you maintain it, such as sidewalks is a one that jumps out. But then I see at the bottom like widened sidewalks beyond ProWag requirements. I read that as you have to widen the sidewalk. If it is existing more than 4 feet, you're not getting points for that. My comment would be, I think you should be getting points if you are maintaining something that is wider, that already exceeds the requirements. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that comment. The complete streets planning factor did have that. It was improve, maintain, or install. And so we could add that into this.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments, questions for Allison? You know, from what I've heard so far, I think the general reaction here is supportive, and so I think with a little bit of language about maintaining, improving, and installing, we'll look to see these moved out of draft and into final numbers for our next meeting. All right. Well, Allison, thank you so much for
Thank you.
being with us today. And next up, Doug's going to wrap us up today just with an update on inclusive growth, jobs and households, and then kind of segue into what our next steps are.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Kama. When we started this a couple meetings ago, it was the intention to make proposals for changes to the inclusive growth planning factor and the jobs and households transportation impact factor. At this point in time, we're not proposing any changes, and we want to explain why. So we just launched an effort internally here at CMAP to work on developing a tool that we hope will replace the inclusive growth planning factor, something that will incorporate equity. It's something that we would be looking at for the CMAC program as well. So we didn't want to get ahead of ourselves and trying to do something to replace it while we have an ongoing effort to handle that. With the jobs and households transportation impact factor, this was a work that went into the On to 2050 plan, and with the draft 2026 RTP and the Century Plan work that's underway, we also didn't want to get ahead of ourselves on that as well. So we want to make sure that we're aligning with whatever the planning work that we're doing. So right now we're proposing to hold it as is. With that being said, we've got several different changes that we've heard about today and previous meetings. Our plan is to make edits to the program application booklet and bring that back to your August meeting for your approval with the changes incorporated as part of that. So with that, we'll take any questions on not only this, but any of the other factors that we've worked on or methodology changes that we've suggested.
Questions for Doug on the recommendation to hold steady on inclusive growth in jobs and households?
Can I ask one?
Sure.
Because I'm in a lot of the mayor's groups in the regions, as Mayor Kuchler is too, I get to talk to a lot of mayors, and there seems to be two stories out there. Some towns are having no growth at all and they're losing population. And there's a few of us that are growing fairly significant. And I guess I'm one of them. And between 2022 and the end of 26, we will have added between 900 and 1,000 new living units to Batavia in that 4-year period. And that's a lot of houses, and it's I now have 6 senior living communities in town, which is another whole dynamic that you get into that because they have certain transportation needs and whatever. But then I go talk to some of my others and they're saying, boy, I wish I could get something started. I don't have anybody coming into my town. Do you find that as a regional trend in the region?
I don't know. That would be something I would have to look into. But I'm sure as a region as a whole, I know that there's been very limited growth, but there's been growth. Other than that, I can't speak to that.
I mean, it's my observation that you get into Cook County and DuPage County, and they're pretty well tight together. The towns are right up to each other, so there's not a lot of room to annex and grab some more land. In my case, I've got some land adjacent. Well, to the east of me, I got Fermilab, so that's totally shut it off. And I didn't have that. I don't know what would be at. But out to the west of Batavia, the Kane County Forest Preserve, I came up with the idea that they wanted to create the largest forest reserve in Kane County. So they went out southwest of Batavia, and they started buying farms, and they now have assembled about 1,600 acres. Now they have some of it in a forest reserve, but a lot of it's still being farmed. But the idea is that long term, this will be this large centralized area in Kane County that'll be this, and it's fairly near 88, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some planning being put into all this, but we've got, because of that, there's people want to live next to this stuff. And In my case, I've got Mooseheart, which is the National Orphanage of the Moose Lodge, is on the south side of Batavia. And what they do there is if you're a Moose member or you have a situation where you have children that no longer have parents, they will take them in and basically raise them till they're ready to be adults and move out. And that was work for a long time. And now they're telling me that the numbers are dropping. That's not happening so much. So now they're going out and finding kids that they can move in there to live there and whatever, which is very nice of them. But what they are finding is that they have a new need and they call it senior living. And so down in Florida, they've built a facility called Moose Haven. It's about 900 new, I'm told 900 new living units, and everybody has to be over 55 and have no kids in school or anybody younger living with them. Then you can move in there. So I'm being told that now we're looking, Mooseheart's got quite a bit of land, and so we've just annexed about 600 acres of it, right adjacent to the south end, the southwest side of Batavia. And in the agreement, we've agreed that they can build 830 age-restricted living units on part of this property. So I think that may be coming, but I guess what I'm thinking is that you guys are going to be challenged by some kind of new age groups and land groups that are moving into the area and will be kind of centralizing themselves. And, we're kind of creating some new ways of doing business here. So I invite you to come out and meet with me sometime. I'll put you in the car and give you a ride around and show you where some of this stuff is, because we've really gotten Geneva and St. Charles kind of have this. They're not as heavy duty as I am, but they've got stuff going on there too. And then you get west of me with Elburn and Sugar Grove. Sugar Grove's having, I guess, a big political fight as to how big they want to be or not be. And so that one's going on. So you've got a lot of different things in motion there. And I'm glad we have CMAP here to kind of keep an eye on what things are going, because I think there's going to be some lessons to be shared and lessons to be learned about what all this growth is doing. And in my case, we had a former factory in Batavia for many years called Furnace Electric, and they made electrical components. And about 10 years ago, they got bought by Siemens. And Siemens comes in to see me and says, well, we just bought Furnace Electric, but we didn't want the company. We only wanted their patents. And so we're going to shut the company down and tell us what you want done with this 300 or 400 acres of land that they've got there. So we told them, well, first we need to have you make sure it's all clean, that there's no environmental problems with it. And secondly, we'd like to ask that you come in and sell it and petition it all to be zoned single-family homes. And so they did all that, and now this is one of the explosive areas that I'm talking about, that we've got all these new attached townhomes being built on it, and it's really rolling out there, and we're getting a lot of people from all over the Chicagoland region, but also from out of state are coming in and buying this stuff, so.
Yeah, and I know a lot of folks in our planning group are keeping track and trying to track these development trends throughout the region, so.
Other comments or questions? Scott?
Not a question, more of a comment, and I've talked to both Kamala and Doug about this in the past. I'm disappointed that no changes are going to be made, especially to the jobs plus household category. It's no secret that with the quantity of points awarded under that category, it effectively shuts off the outskirts of this region from scoring very highly in this program. Cities and counties, I think, don't really have the ability to compete under the current status quo formula. So I'm hopeful that in 2 years or in a year we can reassess once the tool has been sort of worked through. Because I think we all want a program that every city and county can compete in. So that's just sort of a comment for future discussion.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think as a staff, we're kind of excited to take another crack at how we assess these things region-wide. So it just didn't make sense to try and fine tune again this cycle when we've got that effort coming up. So understand the concerns for sure. Any other comments or questions? All right. Well, thank you, Doug, and we look forward to seeing the updated application booklet for action at our next meeting. All right, next up on the agenda is other business. Is there any other business for the good of the committee? Seeing none, public comment. Does anybody in the audience today wish to make a public comment? Seeing none, anyone online, raise your hand or type in the chat box. Seeing nothing there. All right. Very good then. Let the record show that there was no public comment today. Our next meeting is scheduled for August 27th. Seeing no other business, do I have a motion to adjourn?
This Chad's last meeting?
It's on the 27th.
Okay.
Okay. I'll be at PC and I'll be at the, yeah.
Okay.
Just in case something happens, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
just in case Chad doesn't make it to our next meeting after more than 30 years at IDOT, is that
27, but
20? Okay.
50 years as an engineer, so.
All right. So after 50 years as an engineer in our region, Chad is about ready to retire and will be missed quite a bit. And I will have more to say at our next meeting for sure.
Be part of the public comment.
Perfect. Perfect.
A
All right.
round of applause, I guess, for Chad.
Yeah.
And then I'll move
Move to
to
adjourn.
adjourn.
All right. Very good. We've got a motion from Mayor Kukler, second from Mayor Shelkey to adjourn at 10:26 a.m. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are now adjourned. Thank you.